What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be wrapping up my Dynasty Rookie Draft Strategy videos. So over the last couple of days, I have gone through my early first-round pick strategy, so picks 101 through 104. Earlier today, I went through 105 through 108. Today, we are locking in on the back end of the first round, talking about the 109 through the 112. So I'm going to be talking about the targets you guys should be looking at in that late first, how to potentially move up from, that late first round pick, how to move back if you want to trade down, potentially out of the first round, some veteran trade options to look at in that 109 to 112 area. If you had that pick and you have a really solid team, you might just want to flip it for a player that can help you win right now. And then also be looking at some of the targets to be looking at in the late second round. So if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe. Questions, comments, feel free to drop them down below. I'll make sure to get back to every single person. But let's just dive right into some of the targets here. And I do think this is a pretty interesting spot to pick because I think there's going to be a lot of variance on who's actually on the board at this point. So this ADP is from Dynasty Data Lab, and it kind of just shows you the percent chance that each player is going to be available at each pick. So you can see at the 109, like rarely is Quinshon Judkins going to be available, so maybe he falls there. But typically you're going to be looking at names like Tyler Warren, Emeka Egbuka, Caleb Johnson, Colston Loveland, Matthew Golden, RJ Harvey could go in this range, and then potentially Jackson Dart and Luther Burden. So in my personal rankings, I have a top six, where in tier one, I have Ashton Genty. Then in tier two, I have Travis Hunter, Marion Hampton, Tetaroa McMillan, Cam Ward, and then Travion Henderson. It is very unlikely that any of those six are going to fall to the 109 or later, so we'll just kind of forget those. If they somehow do, any of those six are smash options. But then when we're getting into my tier three, this is where I have Emeka Egbuka, Colston Loveland, Quinshon Judkins, Tyler Warren, and then RJ Harvey. I will say I've kind of debated dropping Harvey into like the next tier right there with Caleb Johnson, because I do think there's an argument, like if we're talking about in the short term, I do prefer RJ Harvey. I think he's like the more explosive option, has the receiving upside, better landing spot, but his age is a factor where it's going to be really tough for him to ever be like a locked in top 10 dynasty running back. Like if he goes out there, has a really solid season, and it's like to the same level of Caleb Johnson, who's like 2-3 years younger, he's just going to have way more trade value. So I will throw that out there, could potentially have those guys much closer. In this range, like I talked about, Judkins likely not going to be available. And so I'm kind of just going to make my case why I like prioritizing picks like Emeka Egbuka and then Colston Loveland. So starting off here with Egbuka, I feel like a lot of people were very in on him. They like him as a prospect. I think what's kind of sketching people out at this point is the landing spot. And I know it does look clunky on paper, right? The Bucs have a lot of really solid weapons. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, you have Jalen McMillan, who had a really solid rookie season. But I think we're maybe looking at this too much, just presuming health, looking at it right from year one. We're like, there's a situation where Chris Godwin returning from, a season-ending ankle injury, he's not 100%. He might not even be the same guy, like when he gets back on the field. You have Mike Evans, who's 32 years old, really getting up there in age. I think it's clear they don't view McMillan as like a, locked-in top wide receiver for them long-term. And so, like, if everyone's magically healthy and magically stays healthy for the next couple of seasons, like, yeah, maybe his ceiling is capped, but I'm not really in the business of, like, targeting good prospects and then just fading them because of landing spot. Talented players will find a way to produce. This is a team that is going to throw the ball a lot. There's going to be a lot of passing volume, and I'm just willing to bet on him. Like, I think there are a lot of ways where this pans out. And maybe if everything goes against him and Mike Evans plays at a really high level for a couple of years, Chris Godwin looks great, in that same time period, I still think he can produce if he is as good as I think he is. And I mean, no one is more, equipped of dealing with strong target competition than Emeka Egbuka when you look at the wide receivers he overlapped with in college. And so really just not trying to fade someone who I think is a really solid prospect pre-draft because of potential target competition. Situations are fluid. They can change very quickly. And then my argument for Colston Loveland here, I'm someone who was pretty much going like Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland back-to-back in my rankings. I think they're very different prospects, but I think they're both very solid prospects. And so I'm fine leaning into the landing spot when we're talking about, these two in rookie drafts. Colston Loveland was like Michigan's entire offense last season. He's not going to have, the gaudy counting stats because he was just not on a good offense, but he did everything for them. He's really got like a wide receiver skill set at the tight end position. And I like that Ben Johnson went out, spent a top 10 pick on him. We saw Sam Laporta have a great season as a rookie. Ben Johnson is going to find a way to use him. I think he has the receiving upside to be a really solid fantasy tight end. So he would be like one of my ideal picks in like this 109, 110. If he falls to 111, 112, great. And then I do like RJ Harvey a little bit more than Caleb Johnson. Like I mentioned, I do think, like looking at peak dynasty value, RJ Harvey's just never going to hit a ceiling that Caleb Johnson could, because if they put up the same numbers, age is going to start to be a factor. Now, you might agree or disagree with that, but if the overall market, thinks that way, he's just not going to have the trade value that maybe he could if he was a few years younger. But I still just love the landing spot. I love his big play upside, the receiving ability. And so RJ Harvey is someone I'd be willing to take in the back end of the first round. But Caleb Johnson is still my 112. So if you like him, I still think he's a fine pick in this range. So my priority targets, Emeka Egbuka, Colston Loveland, but I'm fine drafting RJ Harvey. And then honestly, even in that next tier, like based on need, if you really liked these players, I could be talked into a Matthew Golden, a Luther Burden, a Jackson Dart. It is kind of a competitive tier once we're getting into my tier 4 options. So now let's talk about potentially trading up, moving up in the first round with these later round 1 picks. So I think if you're sitting at like the 109, the 110, my kind of goal would be jumping into the top 5. I do think there's kind of a consensus top 5 where you have Genty as the clear number 1. Then you've got like Hampton, Ward going to 3, McMillan's mixed in there, Travis Hunter's mixed in there, but I would like getting one of those top 5. And even though I do have a top 6 in my, top 2 tiers, I like having top 5 because that's a spot where you're going to have a chance to get Travis Hunter in around like 50% of your drafts, who's my 102. So I would obviously be very in on that. So I think you package that 109, the 110, you add a later second round, which, you could potentially have if you do have that 109, 110, and then you find a way to move into the top 5. And if we're talking about like what this would look like from a player perspective, this would be, a Warren, an Egbuka, a Loveland. Just take your pick on whoever you would have drafted there. And then you're adding on like a Jalen Milroe, a Jack Besh. But in return, you are getting, a Travis Hunter, a Tep McMillan. I think, that late round 2 going from Emeka Egbuka, who I do like, I do think that's worth it to kind of tier up into that Travis Hunter, Tep McMillan range. It also could potentially be, a Cam Ward if you do like him at the quarterback position. Then with the other firsts, we have the 111 and the 112, and I think I'm kind of trying to make a similar move. So the 111, the 112, we're still going to package that late second, and then I think you just like add on a late 4th if you have to. Now, it might seem like a lot, right? You could be giving up like 3 of your 4 rookie picks. A late 4th round pick is essentially nothing. Like, first off, the hit rate is so unbelievably low, but if this is the 411, the 412, like pretty much it's just getting first priority at hitting the waiver wire, right? Because like the draft's going to end and then everyone else who's undrafted is just going to be, a free for all to pick those players up. So I really like trading a late 4th is essentially nothing to me. So from a player perspective, once again, this is like a Caleb Johnson, Colston Loveland, add in a Milroe, a Besh. And then, like the 411 could be anything. I just put Isaac Tesla here, like someone who, good athlete, not a strong prospect, probably reached from the Lions, could be going in that area. And then once again, you're getting like a Travis Hunter, Tep McMillan type player back. Now, if you don't want to move up and you actually want to move back, you don't really like this range, maybe you don't think there's a ton of consensus, which I think some people might agree with. Like if you like Golden, Burden, Dart, it might make sense to move into the early second where you can draft those guys, and still get another piece on top of it. So with the 109, the 110, I'd be trying to move into like the second round or move back into the second round and then try to get an early 3rd on top of it. Now, I don't think this is something that's going to be able to be pulled off super consistently, but it's very possible that someone sitting there in the early second round, they really like someone who's on the board. Maybe they really need a tight end, so they want Loveland, they want Warren, maybe they really need a wide receiver. They want an Emeka Egbuka. Maybe they just love one of the running backs, an RJ Harvey, Caleb Johnson. people tend to be like overly optimistic with their rookie picks. So I do think it's possible to pull this off. I will say though, if you're moving into the early second, I want to stay in the top 15. So I wouldn't want the 204. I would want the 203 or better because I do think there's a pretty clear top 15, and then I do think there's a fall off. Now, there's no guarantee those top 15 go off the board consecutively, but you could just lock that down if you do get a top 15 pick. So this is like, trading Warren and Egbuka for potentially RJ Harvey, Jackson Dart, and then you add on like a potential Tyler Shuck at quarterback, Terrence Ferguson at tight end. There's going to be a lot of different names. Kyle Williams potentially at wide receiver going in that area. So I think like within the same tier or a general consensus, you're kind of just, picking whoever's left, but then you're getting a solid prospect in the early third to go along with it. And then a very similar design when we're talking about the 111, 112, just like trading up, I'm just kind of throwing in a fourth on top of it. Once again, those fourths don't really matter to get that same deal because I do want to stay in the top 15. That's kind of the goal. So like Caleb Johnson, Colston Loveland, throw in Isaac Tesla again or fill in the blank on whoever you want that to be. And then you're getting, RJ Harvey, Jackson Dart, Tyler Shuck, Ferguson type in that third round. And now let's say you don't want to move up or down for picks. You just want to make a trade for a veteran. If we're looking at the 109, the 110, keep in mind, like, I'm not trying to like panic sell these picks. I'm very fine staying on the clock and making the selection. And so when I'm looking at these veteran trade targets, like, I really want to feel good about it. I don't want to be in a spot where I'm like, maybe I prefer the veteran or maybe I want to make my pick. Like, if I'm moving off that draft selection, I want it to be for a player who I feel very confident in. So the 109, 110, I've got guys like Rome Odunze, Chris Olave. I think Odunze is interesting for Dynasty because I think some people might be starting to sweat a little bit just with the target competition, bringing in two stud weapons with Colston Loveland, Luther Burden. He didn't have a great season last year, but like you could really see the upside when you're like top 10 pick paired with Ben Johnson. Him and DJ Moore are the only wide receivers. You have Cole Kmet there. So I think it's more of like the situation seemed better for him where it's just way less crowded. Now maybe people are concerned about the target competition. He's not Ben Johnson's guy, right? It wasn't the Ben Johnson coaching staff that drafted Rome Odunze. But I'd say out of all the pre-existing Bears weapons, Rome Odunze is the guy I'm least concerned with. Like the Luther Burden pick seems like direct competition with DJ Moore. Obviously Loveland is going to be competition with Kmet at the tight end position, but I think Rome Odunze is going to be able to play outside. I think he's going to get to play in a role that is much better suited for him than he was in last season. And then also just some of the comments that Ben Johnson has made talking about, wide receivers needing to be willing to block, not giving up on their routes if they're not the first read. A lot of these comments seem very targeted at DJ Moore and not at Rome Odunze. So if someone's panicking because of the target competition, I'd love adding Rome Odunze. The other player I have here is Chris Olave, and he's always going to be, a sketchy dynasty value because of the concussion concerns where, like, it's possible he goes out next year, has a concussion, and is just done. Like, that is, a potential outcome for him, which is not great because the floor is very low, and he could just be done at any point. But he's also a proven wide receiver talent. He's put up wide receiver 2 seasons in awful offensive situations. I do think he has wide receiver 1 talent. And from a, ability perspective, he is already a hit in the NFL. It's just the health issues that give him uncertainty. But prospects have their own uncertainty, not necessarily in the health department, but on just like whether or not they're actually going to be a capable, solid NFL player. So this is kind of the spot where I'd be willing to take the risk. Maybe I'd prefer it for like the 111, 112, but if you're sitting there, you don't really like what's on the board, I think Chris Olave is interesting. And then for the 111, 112, looking at guys like Jordan Addison, Jalen Waddle, I think Jordan Addison's a really interesting option for contending teams where he's still young, so he's going to have, a long time frame to produce for fantasy, but we kind of know what we're getting where he's not a super high ceiling option. So if you just want to lock down another productive piece on your already solid team, it could make sense to move off that 111, 112 if you don't have like a glaring need at tight end or something like that. So he's not going to be like a league winner for you, but he's a proven hit. Your team can just continue chugging along. And then I think this is an interesting opportunity to buy Jalen Waddle. I mean, he was valued so much higher prior to last season, just completely flopped in 2024. And I'm still a believer in the talent. Like, what he did his first 3 seasons in the NFL. I mean, he was like a back end wide receiver 1, solid wide receiver 2. And the upside for Jalen Waddle was always like, with Tyreek Hill, he's going to be capped. He's going to be more like that Devonta Smith type production. But when Tyreek Hill starts to age, potentially gets traded, moves on, whatever, Jalen Waddle is going to have that opportunity to be the wide receiver 1. And there's like this weird alignment right now where he's coming off his worst season of his career, but they also could potentially move off of Tyreek Hill, and all of a sudden Jalen Waddle could go from like awful fantasy season to now being an absolute monster. So I am kind of willing to take the risk there and sell like a late first to get Jalen Waddle on my roster. Now, the final part here, we will talk about some of the targets in round 2. I do think this is an interesting spot to draft. There's going to be some variance. You could have some fallers. It could also be a spot where it feels kind of gross, where you might have to force a pick. So looking at some of the players that are available here, Cam Scatterbo, seemingly pretty unlikely to fall here to the 209. If he does fall, I think he's a great pick. Jaden Higgins, kind of a similar thing. Maybe he falls to the 209. He's not going to go much later. Then you're getting into names like Shedeur Sanders, Jalen Milroe, Jack Besh, Mason Taylor, Bashal Tutin, Devin Neal, Jalen Knoll. Now, my personal targets in this range, the tier that I have after that top, 15 with like Burden, Golden, Dart, those guys. My next tier is Bashal Tutin, Jaden Higgins, Trey Harris, Cam Scatterbo, and Tyler Shuck. So Bashal Tutin, according to this ADP, in my opinion, is like way underdrafted. He is here consistently, like potentially falling into the early third, which I think is wild. And so Bashal Tutin would kind of be like my priority target in this range. If you do get a falling Higgins, a falling Harris, it's not going to happen a ton, but totally cool hitting the draft button on those guys here. And then I know like Tyler Shuck seems like a gross pick. He's catching a lot of heat for his age. A lot of Saints fans just hate the pick. It's kind of just a spot where I'm willing to plug my nose and make the selection, because quarterbacks, if they get a chance to get on the field, which is like the biggest hurdle, right? Just getting out there, being the starting quarterback, they have a lot of opportunities where you can move off of them, even if you're not a believer long-term. Like you might think Tyler Shuck has no potential, he's going to be a bust, whatever. But even a guy like Will Levis, he showed flashes in his first couple of games, and all of a sudden he's valued as like, I think he got as high as quarterback 15 for keep trade cut as like a dynasty trade target. Like he's a locked in top 20 guy with just a couple of games. Tyler Shuck's a dude who has the physical tools, really good arm. He's a big quarterback. He is going to have at least a few games where he looks good, and someone is going to overreact. They're going to want to trade for him. And so even if you're not a believer long-term, I just think from like an asset perspective, you are going to have the opportunity to move off of him. And like, quarterback evaluation is so tough, right? Like it seems like every year when you have some dudes that like everyone is against, they somehow end up turning out. Like I felt like it was Bo Nix last year, obviously very different draft capital, very different, quality of prospects. But just when people are so sure that a prospect is not going to work out, it does seem like sometimes it just goes the other way. So I'm willing to take the swing on Shuck here. I could understand if you're just out on it. Then I'm kind of looking at, Jack Besh, Kyle Williams, potential options. I'm fine with Jalen Milroe, honestly, here as like a lottery ticket if you want to just, pray for like the Jalen Hurts upside that he develops, gets an opportunity, comes with that fantasy upside. He's another guy where if he just gets on the field and is able to run the ball, like people are going to love him for Dynasty. Justin Fields held a lot of value even when he wasn't playing super well from a real life perspective. The hurdle for Milroe is just that he's not going to have the same runway to get a start like Tyler Shuck is, where he's probably going to be the favorite to be the week 1 guy. So those are some of my late round 2 targets. That's going to wrap it up for this one, though. Let me know your thoughts, any questions, comments, drop them down below. It's an interesting spot to pick. Let me know how your drafts go. Drop it down in the comment section. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.